everyone. Let us welcome Jeremy Crawford to Dragon Talk. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi
there. Jeremy, you're my favorite. I love you, Jeremy.
Oh, I love you too, Shelly.
Oh, no, it's not me. That's our studio audience.
The studio audience. It's
well.
Yeah. But I love you too.
I mean, because I will always remember fondly our first Gen Con years ago, walking around together there and just dreaming of going shopping at Nordstrom's.
I know. It was so close. It was just like 2 doors down. Yes. We will never know what treasures the Indianapolis Nordstrom held for us.
Yes.
We'll never know.
Man, how long ago was that? Was that for 5th edition? Fourth edition?
Yeah, that was back in the 4th edition days.
Was it?
Yeah.
You know, I never made it to that Nordstrom.
Neither did I.
I never did. It literally was like right down the street, and I just never made it.
Yeah, it's like it's that Nordstrom's glimmering in the Feywild. We're never going to reach it. It just keeps receding into the distance.
It does. Yeah.
As soon as you get closer to it, it goes farther away.
Yeah, that is not like me to miss out on a shopping opportunity.
Do you guys think that Tasha is shopping at that Nordstrom right now?
Where would Tasha shop?
Wherever Tasha wants.
Is she like a Nordstrom kind of witch, or is she like Home Goods?
So Tasha is willing to go to Nordstrom's, but only on the annual sale, because even though she is wealthy beyond imagining, she's also whip smart, and she is not going to pay more than she has to.
Do you think she uses a personal shopper? Like, does she just want to show up and have a dressing room full of clothes, and then she'll just go, yes, yes, no, yes, no, no, yes?
So I am deciding right now in this interview that one of the red caps in one of the paintings with her in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is her personal shopper. His job is to make sure that dressing room is stocked and ready to go when the Witch Queen arrives.
So good.
Yes, Witch Queen, here are your outfits that I've chosen for you.
And she does not have time. Like, you better just pick soundly, get everything really precise. You know, sometimes when you go to Nordstrom and you're like, I just want to quickly try this on, and then somebody like shows up, throws a bunch of hangers over the door. Do they do this to men too at Nordstrom? I don't know. And they're like, oh my God, I saw you, and I just thought like these would look super cute on you too. Just give them a try. I'm like,
what?
No, no, thank you. I am not here to try on bathing suits.
Yes.
I don't want, these are not my size. Go.
And I have a rest of the day, because at least if Tasha is anything like me, oh my gosh, it takes me so long to decide on clothes. So I have to have a really like curated selection that I'm going to try on, because otherwise this could turn into like, oh my God, I've been here for 4 hours.
It's been 84 years.
I need food.
Yes. Yeah, my blood sugar is crashing. I'm about to cast power word kill on somebody.
Yeah.
What did you call them? Red cap?
The red caps.
Red caps.
So in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, there's this glorious painting of Tasha as the Witch Queen. It's the chapter opening for the chapter about group patrons. And it's actually an image of her being a group patron. There's a group of wizards down at the base of the throne, and she's guarded by these 2 fey creatures, red caps, one of which we now know is her personal shopper.
It's canon. It's canon.
And I think my favorite part of that painting, I mean, there's so many things to like about it, but just check out her boots. The heels on those boots. Whew.
Did you put that in the art order? Did you like do a little fashion designing while you were filling out these art orders?
No, the artist really was inspired by Sean Wood's concept art for Tasha as the Witch Queen, and then just went to town on those boots. And the way Tasha's legs are crossed, the boot, one of the boots with that heel, oh, it's perfection. Chef's kiss.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh my God. Why are we not making these? I mean, I feel like that could be a good promotional.
Let's get some awesome shoe fashion designers on the horn and be like, let's do
swag.
A Tasha line.
I actually just opened up the PDF because I couldn't wait to see.
Like, show me these boots.
Please excuse me for a moment while I go shopping.
That's awesome.
in Tasha's
Well,
closet.
I wanted to start. I mean, we already are delving into fun tidbits around Tasha, but I think it might be interesting for people to kind of get what was the conception behind this book. Because I know you've been working on it for a long time. You've been doing tons of Unearthed Arcana with these subclasses for at least a year, if not more, getting feedback. So what was the initial pitch for the D&D team around this book, which was called, codename for a long time ahead of this, and just not recently, but within the last few couple of months has been about Tasha.
So we start. Oh, wait a second. I think Shelley just saw it.
I just found them. Sorry. Woo! First of all, I love her in this image, but oh my God.
I know those boots are everything.
They are everything.
Yeah,
I want a pair.
They're like all the way up too. Mm-hmm. That heel. Damn.
So never mind. I withdraw the question. There's no reason to, because we just want these more fashion tips from Tasha, please.
So we started thinking about this book very shortly after finishing up Xanathar's Guide to Everything, because we knew at some point, in the coming years, there would be a reason to do another one of these books that gathers together a collection of expansion items for the game that are targeted at both players and dungeon masters. And so, we had this notion in our minds as we worked on many other D&D books that, since then people have enjoyed, and we began testing different character options that started to appear in Unearthed Arcana. And then eventually when we decided, okay, we are for sure doing this book and we want it to come out in fall of 2020, that's when it started to come into focus that this book would likely have Tasha as the point of view character. And we chose her because we wanted to pick a woman in the D&D multiverse who, their name is in the core books. Tasha is right there in the player's handbook with Tasha's hideous laughter. Also somebody who has a wonderfully rich story, and also who could plausibly be familiar with the broad array of things present in this book. It's similar to why we chose Xanathar for Xanathar's Guide as this crime boss in, the most bustling city in Waterdeep. Xanathar would have the possibility of getting little tidbits of information about almost anything. And Tasha similarly has this amazing history that Greg, you and I have talked about in another episode, that has caused her to have contacts with beings all over the D&D multiverse. She's one of the most powerful wizards in D&D's history. And so we thought she would be perfect. And also especially because of her mix of good humor, cleverness, and sass, she would also be a wonderful companion to have along the way in this book. And because we know throughout the book, she has quotes at various points talking about the book's content. And we saw some sass in Xanathar's Guide as well. But Xanathar, with its beholder mindset, which is a very alien mindset to the human mindset, I think was less relatable in some ways than Tasha, because Tasha is basically one of us, human like us, although a human with a wondrous background, and a bit more relatable, I think. And once Tasha became the point of view character for the book, that also drove some of the content decisions that the team and I started to make, because we knew we're going to have this really powerful wizard associated with this book. And so we started to ponder the various options that would appear in it through the lens of having options with a lot of otherworldly, supernatural, and magical qualities. And that led to us experimenting with subclass options that in some cases are a little more off the wall than we would normally do. This led to Tasha in some ways is responsible for there being as many magic items as there are in this book, because we realized if we're going to have a Tasha's focused book, we're going to want to have some of the magic items associated with Tasha. And then, well, if we're going to have those magic items, we should have other magic items. And so this is a great example of how the point of view character actually really helped inspire some of our content decisions. We
That's
also
cool.
decided we wanted a few more Tasha's spells. Well, then if we're going to have a few more Tasha's spells, then we're also going to might as well join those with some other spells, and so on and so forth.
I love that.
So Tasha, more than just being a commentator on the book's content, in a way was our muse as we were coming up with some of this content.
The connection to Xanathar's Guide to Everything too, I think a lot of people, get it now, but it's good to make that kind of clear that like that's why it's called Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, is that it kind of continues upon, the style of book that was. If there was an alternate title, what would you, because Book of the Plains, she has the Demonomicon, she's got lots of other, things that we could have gone in, but that's the main reason why we chose For Everything, right?
Yeah, and actually, you can see, especially on the standard cover of the book, visual evidence of one of the other titles we were considering, because one of the other titles we were considering was Tasha's Grimoire of Everything, which is one of the reasons why she's holding that book. So when we wrote the art order, we basically covered our bases so that whatever title we ended up choosing, the painting would work.
We need a book, we need a cauldron.
A witch's hat. Done.
Yeah.
I love that. But as there's so many things in this book: magic items, group patrons, character options, the subclasses for each of the 10 classes now in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is really the meat of this book. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I think everything in this book is exciting in some way to me, not only as the person who oversaw the creation, but also just as a D&D fan. But I do think when it comes to different tables engagement, one of the ways that groups are going to most often see pieces of this book popping up into play is when someone at the table makes a character using one of these subclasses. And also the subclasses were the piece that had the largest amount of community involvement, because we've been sharing versions of these subclasses with the broader D&D community through Unearthed Arcana, going back into 2019. And the feedback that people gave us on those subclasses has fed directly into our thinking on how to refine these subclasses, to address the feedback we got, and to create what we think are the best versions of each of these subclasses for D&D. And that's what people are going to see when the book comes out on the 17th. They're going to get to see the culmination of over a year and a half of conversation between the D&D studio and the broader D&D community on what do we want to see. And I think attached to those subclasses, the other piece of this book's heart are the new optional class features, because each class is going to get new features that players will have the option of incorporating into characters who are members of those classes. And the Unearthed Arcana that presented those class feature options to the world was by far the most popular Unearthed Arcana we have ever released for 5th edition.
Wow.
And basically the most popular on several metrics, because it not only attracted more responses in the survey than we'd ever received for an Unearthed Arcana article, but also the overall satisfaction scores were across the board the highest we've ever seen, especially for an Unearthed Arcana that included as much content as that particular one did. And so people are going to get new toys to play with, even if they don't use one of the new subclasses. Because let's say you're playing a rogue and you want to keep playing your thief from the player's handbook, but you might want to start trying out the new aim option for cunning action that's introduced in Tasha's Cauldron. And so this time, even more so, I'd say, than in Xanathar's guide, there really is something for everybody, because even if you don't get a subclass, your character can still get new class features in this book.
Do you have a favorite subclass?
Ooh. It is always hard for me to pick because I love something about all of them. Oh my goodness. Am I permitted to pick several favorites?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. You can pick 3.
All right. I am willing to abide by the dice. Okay.
Okay.
So three favorite subclasses. Keeping in mind I like all of them. But if like today I were going to all right, I want to make a character. One of the ones I would pick is the Circle of Stars for the Druid.
Oh, nice.
Partly because I love the mysticism of that subclass and this notion not only of channeling the magic of constellations, but having those constellations appear on you. I just think the aesthetic for that is really wonderful. I also would love to play a Psi Warrior. These are the fighters who use the power of their mind as weapon and as shield, creating telekinetic force fields, hurling things around with their minds.
Cool.
I think it would be a lot of fun. And the art that we have for the Psi Warrior is fantastic. All right, number 3. Oh my goodness.
We're going to hold you to it. You can only do 3.
No.
This is going to be tough. You know what? I'm going to pick for my 3rd, the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer.
Nice.
And part of that is the Aberrant Mind has some really awesome psychic powers, but I also really enjoy in the final version of this subclass the aesthetic range of the class that we're delivering. Because if you want, you can make this character, just have sort of glimmering eyes as they use the power of their mind, or you can have tentacles and other ooky stuff. So you can really push it in terms of the type of character you want to play with that subclass. And plus, just the abilities are really interesting, and they're fun to pair with the sorcerer's meta magic options. So I think all 3 of those subclasses would be a hoot.
You mentioned,
Okay.
the playtest period, essentially by doing all these Unearthed Arcana, and 2 of those 3 classes, subclasses are psionic in nature, and that was a large shift over the course of the Unearthed Arcana. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you guys were thinking about psionics and how you eventually got to the way that they were portrayed here in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything?
Yeah, we over the course of the Unearthed Arcana did try several different approaches with psionics, and the fact that we did try several approaches wasn't really surprising, because if you look at the history of D&D has taken a number of different approaches to how psionics function. If you look at 1st edition, they're not the same as they are in 2nd edition, and those aren't the same as they are in 3rd edition, and those aren't the same as they are in 4th edition. So there really is not a psionic through line in D&D, other than to say D&D has always had psionic powers in some form. And it's just how they function, though, has varied quite a bit. So we knew that as soon as we decided we wanted to include some psionic options in this book, that we would need to go through several rounds of design to really zero in on what do fans of the game as it currently stands want to see when it comes to psionically themed characters. And so we at first experimented with very different approaches for the subclasses of different classes. Then we tried a unified approach where there was the fighter subclass, the rogue subclass, and the sorcerer subclass that all shared sort of a similar mechanic. We also had a psionic wizard at one point, which didn't survive the playtest process. And then we arrived where we are in the final book, where as a result of the playtest feedback, we saw that people liked there being some similar functionality in the Rogue's Soulblade subclass and the Fighter's Psy Warrior subclass. But I think playtesters rightly pointed out that trying to use the same psionic functionality in the Sorcerer subclass was a bit too much. It was the game design equivalent of a hat on a hat, because sorcerers already have spells with spell slots and sorcery points to spend with their meta magic options and other special abilities. And then the hat we put on those really other two hats was, and now you also have this psionic energy die to spend. It was just a bridge too far. So what we ended up doing with the sorcerer subclass is creating a hybrid version of our previous aberrant mind and that psionic soul sorcerer, really bringing together the elements that playtesters were the most happy with, and then striving in our final design to deliver a psionic sorcerer experience that was not overly complicated. I'm just like, wait, soul blade, soul knife.
Soul knife.
That's a knife. The rogue subclass and the fighter subclass, they both have ended up using a psionic energy die, as people saw in the playtest, but it no longer grows and shrinks because the feedback we got is people felt that was too complicated. And so now you still have fun dice you get to spend on your psionic abilities, but you just spend those dice rather than a die, going up in size and going down in size, which I thought was a fun idea, but people were like, oof, it's a bit too much. It was sort of another case of a hat on a hat.
Right.
And Shelley, we're just going to keep going back to fashion.
I know. I love that analogy. I also love the aberrant mind has one of Tasha's best quotes, I think, in the whole book. Because that's one of the things that I love about the book is that you get a little taste of Tasha throughout. She has her little interjections in there. Can I read it?
Oh, please do.
Tentacles, psychic powers, beings from beyond the stars. One person's bad dream is another person's good time. I love it.
Did you write that, Jeremy?
So,
or is that Wes, perhaps?
So that one was both of us.
Ooh.
Yeah, so Tasha's quotes were all written by Wes Schneider and me. Wes did an initial pass on them, and then I went through, did some tweaks, and then wrote some additional ones. And that one, I think that one was actually a fusion of two other quotes we had, and we ran out of space for one of them, and turned it into that little bit of delicious sass.
It's very sassy, and I love it. It resonated with me.
Yeah. Well, and I love too that you so elegantly described like how playtest feedback, over the last year and a half has impacted the design, and how it's just a great tenet of 5th edition from D&D Next to the current releases today, about how it is really the D&D fans who are shaping this game and these new subclasses.
Absolutely. We have carried the passion for incorporating feedback into the game, going all the way back to those D&D Next days. And it's informing everything we're doing on our future books. We've already released Unearthed Arcana articles that are for books that come out after Tasha's, because of how committed we are to continuing this ongoing conversation, this sort of designing in public that we've really loved doing throughout the life of this edition.
Were there any things that you received in feedback for this book that surprised you? Anything that you were like, whoa, I really thought this was going to be, a home run, or hey, I'm putting this out there, but I'm pretty sure people aren't going to like it, but then they did like it. What was something that you were like, whoa, I'm really glad we did this playtesting because we got this feedback.
So a great example of how sometimes what we read online initially is not an accurate foreshadowing of the feedback we get on the survey is when we released the Wild Soul Barbarian, which is now called the Wild Magic Barbarian in the book. The sort of initial anecdotal response on Twitter and Reddit was mixed. There were people who really dug it, and then other people who were like, ooh, this is a little too wild for my taste. What's all this, wild magic stuff going on with this barbarian? But then when we got the survey, which is from thousands of people as opposed to tens of people, because we always are struck because of how much data we get, of how we always have to kind of make sure to not get too swept up in initial sort of anecdotal responses to things, because even if there's a lot of passion on social media, if you count the number of people, it's never as many people as who respond to our surveys, which is usually in the thousands as opposed to the tens or the hundreds. And when we got that survey feedback, the satisfaction scores for that barbarian were through the roof. And so what that told us is, all right, we did see some initial mixed response, but then when it came time for the survey, people were like, oh my gosh, no, we really love this concept. They gave us some great feedback on things for us to refine, and we addressed those concerns in the final version. There was particularly some concern about a feature we had early on that allowed the barbarian to recharge other people's spell slots. And in our original design, it was definitely too generous. And so we reframed that for the final version. But people are going to get that wild magic barbarian that tickled them back when we released it in UA.
That is super cool. And I do love that the feedback really is so thoughtfully considered, and it changes things. It really does.
Absolutely. And it also results in us saying goodbye to things sometimes that we love. We really enjoyed, for instance, creating the Onomancy wizard, but that wizard they decided to stay in their study. And
not ready yet. Not ready for prime time.
Yeah.
But maybe another time.
And that is, Shelley, that is such a good point, because many, many times, especially for a book like this, we might see in the playtest feedback, now is not the time. But that doesn't mean it's gone for good.
Right.
We have all sorts of things that might not make it today, but then they go back into the laboratory and they might reemerge later, either under the same name or sometimes under a different name. There's in fact an example of that in this book.
Oh.
Back when we were working on Eberron Rising from the Last War, where we first introduced the Artificer class, we released in Unearthed Arcana a subclass called the Archivist. And we got some really good substantive feedback on that subclass, but the satisfaction scores, they weren't low, but they also weren't high enough for us to feel like we had a clear mandate to move forward with the design as it was. And one of the bits of feedback that we kept seeing when we went through was, wow, this really feels like a wizard subclass. And so what we did for Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is we took the Archivist, reimagined it as a wizard subclass, released it in Unearthed Arcana as the Order of Scribes. The satisfaction scores were then much higher than they were for the Archivist, and now that subclass is going to be in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, now a wizard subclass. And so basically nothing when it comes to our game design is necessarily ever dead forever. That's why I often like to just say, no, it just, it's hanging out. It's hanging out for a while longer.
It's in the brain pan, getting...
Where is it, though? Like, do you have, like, a folder of, like, darlings? Like
darlings you've killed?
They're not killed, though.
Yeah, they've
just been
have
spared.
To wait. Yeah.
Yes.
We actually have multiple folders of them.
Binders of subclasses.
I know. I kind of want to go through it.
Yeah. And we have... we have archive folders for past books where you can go in and actually it's like, oh my gosh, there's a whole like cast of characters here who didn't make it, but that doesn't mean they won't make it at some point.
You never know. Never.
And that's true not only for subclasses, but it's true for spells that we tinker with, magic items, monsters. We have many that, some that have made it out into Unearthed Arcana and then vanished. But then we also have even more that we've designed internally and never showed in Unearthed Arcana. I mean, so I almost feel like we have a whole island of not misfit toys.
I was just going to say.
But basically toys that are just, they're waiting their turn.
Yeah. Well, I liked what you said earlier when you said it might not just be the right time, right? Like, it's not even necessarily because the design needs more time to bake, but maybe the community needs to get to a place where they're excited to enter this new kind of territory, right? Like there's a right time in the community as well.
Absolutely. And that is an important factor for us, because one of the things that is especially on my mind whenever I'm pondering what rules elements are we going to really invest in the next year in our design, because everything we work on takes time. I'm always wondering and then looking at the data to see what does the community want now, and then I have to do some predicting. What are they going to want, a year and a half from now, because we're often working that far ahead. And often it really is just, well, they don't want it now, but we'll check back in.
Right.
And it could be in 2 years, that thing that wasn't in season back then, it's now what everyone wants.
I think that's why we're going to reintroduce Crystal Pepsi for all of you. It just wasn't the right time.
The time feels right. It definitely feels right. 2020. Bring me back the Crystal Pepsi.
I don't think anybody had that on their bingo card.
Oh my goodness.
Another fascinating example of this, and anyone who is with us in the D&D Next playtest might be able to remember this. But in Tasha's Cauldron for Everything, we introduce a collection of new summoning spells that have the stat blocks for the creature you summon right there in the spell. And these are special customizable stat blocks. Rewind the clock. Way back when we did the D&D Next playtest, we introduced a similar approach to the Druid's Wild Shape, where in one of the D&D Next versions of Wild Shape, we put the stat blocks right in the feature, and you could kind of reskin them and whatnot. And at the time, the community didn't want that kind of approach. They were looking for a more traditional approach to Wild Shape. I want to go grab a monster stat block and turn into that. And so that's the direction we ended up going in the player's handbook. Well, now jump back to the present. We then presented, knowingly that we had done actually the same kind of approach back in D&D Next, this new approach to summoning, where it's just like what we did back then with Wild Shape. And now people are like, yes, please give this to us. And part of that is because people had spent, at least with summoning spells, the last, almost, I guess, 6 years since the Player's Handbook came out, playing with summoning where you do go to monster books and pick out stat blocks, and people are now like, okay, yes, please just give me a stat block in the spell that I get to customize, and explains very clearly how it works. And on top of that is a spell I can cast in combat, because we made most of the summoning spells in the player's handbook something you had to cast outside combat, partly because of the complexity of those spells.
Mhm.
And we didn't want to bog things down. But for Tasha's, we had several goals for those spells. We wanted them to be easier to use by putting this special stat block right there in front of the player. But we also wanted you to be able to cast it in combat, because in so many fantasy stories and also in other fantasy games, the person's there and just suddenly calls the creature forward and has them lunge at their foe. And that's definitely a bit of the game's fantasy that we wanted to make sure was alive and well in the game in Tasha's Cauldron.
That's a really
I
great
think
example
that's
because it
very
really
cool.
shows, a growth in the player base, right? Like, the player base was pretty confident in their feedback, more, I guess 7 years ago when you introduced that during D&D Next. And then, here we've had all of this influx of new audience coming into and learning this game. And they overwhelmingly chose no, I think convenience of play and having that fantasy of casting something during battle, kind of changes it and makes it more, so I love that that's a really illustrative example of the D&D team, listening to the current temperature of what's going on in play.
And it's also a great example of why I often say that our job of listening and conversing with the community never ends.
Right.
Because as the community grows, and also as people's tastes change, what people want is also going to grow and change. And so what people said they wanted of the game 6, 7, 8 years ago isn't necessarily the same thing that the majority of the D&D community wants today. And
Right.
Yeah.
that's why we check back in with the community, over and over and over again to see, okay, where are we now?
I wonder if the 2020 with all of this online playing, or and of course having new people joining the D&D community, but I wonder if you'll start seeing results that are skewed towards not being in the same space, or not everybody being remote. I just if any of that would infiltrate feedback and how that would impact
I bet it could.
future products.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, everybody's mindset's a little bit different. I mean, it's even though it's theater of the mind, you probably are playing D&D differently online than you do when you're together.
And you can even see that in one of the sections of Xanathar's Guide versus Tasha's Cauldron. Back when we were working on Xanathar's Guide, I used to actually get a lot of questions about playing D&D on a grid with miniatures.
Oh, interesting.
Not surprisingly, I almost never get questions like that anymore.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is interesting.
Which is one of the reasons why, while Xanathar's had a section on tips on using area of effects and other elements of the game on a grid, Tasha's has no such section, because again the community's interests and needs have evolved, but then it's possible in a year or two suddenly I'm going to be asked questions and see a lot of interest in using miniatures again.
Right.
I mean, speaking of all the other sections in the book, I really love the group patron idea about having a codified thing that Dungeon Masters have used since the game began, of these ideas of people who were, or NPCs who were giving tasks to the players and kind of creating a relationship with the party, but having these storytelling tools, I think is going to be a great boon for people, and we'll hopefully see a lot more of them being used going forward.
I agree. And I think the perks that we provide for each of the group patrons, these perks you can get if you work for that patron, will also be a nice little nudge for some groups that might be hesitant at first to formalize, yeah, we work for this sovereign, or we are working for this criminal syndicate. As soon as you put a carrot out there, people are like, oh, maybe I do want that cool thing. So those perks are there to provide some concrete encouragement to engage with a group patron. But I'm especially interested to see how having a group patron can alter a particular adventuring party's story. And I think it will also be fun to see the concept evolve. I'll be interested to find out if some DMs explore a group maybe having more than one patron. And what does it mean when your 2 patrons or your 3 patrons give you conflicting assignments? And where do you go from there? That's actually something I am toying with very lightly in my current home D&D game. I had everyone essentially choose a personal patron, which for the purposes of my home game I called an entanglement. and then what I'm doing behind the scenes is seeing how the group having different entanglements affects the story. And it's been fun because essentially what I did is just take the group patron concept, but then individualize it. And some of the characters have the same patron, but then others have other ones, and they don't all necessarily want the same things.
Mommy and daddy are fighting. I feel like that's such great storytelling there too. Like, if they're, I mean, going on the Fae thing, because I think, knowing what I know about you, I'm pretty sure your campaign has something to do about that.
It does.
Yeah. So having, the Seelie and the Unseelie court having, loyalties from different members of the party, I could just see that being a ton of fun to play out.
Yeah. Although in this case, the players don't yet know which Fae groups are attached to the groups they're entangled with.
They might find out.
Yeah, we'll see.
So the, in addition to the magic items and spells and amazing kind of things that you can very easily get into your game and that has been used for many years, I really appreciate the section on puzzles in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I know, having worked with Elisa Teague on a bunch of different things, including the ARG surrounding the Waterdeep campaign, as well as here in D&D Live 2020 when we were introducing Icewind Dale. She's just such a great and creative puzzle maker, and I'm really proud to see her work show off in Tasha's here.
Yeah, it was an easy call for us to go to her to work on this because not only of how good she is at puzzle design, but also because of her love of D&D. And she has so much experience fusing D&D with puzzle making and puzzle solving. And so we were like, absolutely, she's the one we want to work with to create this section for DMs. And I include myself in this group of DMs who might like the notion of including puzzles, but
Where do you begin?
Yeah. Because, there's always that line you're walking between challenging the players versus the characters, and is it D&D enough? And I think she strikes that balance with the puzzles in this book. And I'm not only looking forward to DMs out in the world getting their hands on these, I'm looking forward to using them and also repurposing them, because in the book we do give some tips on, hey, this puzzle has this presentation, but you could actually reskin aspects of it to use it in a different kind of environment or with a different set of NPCs. So I think there's a nice amount of flexibility there for DMs to take these and integrate them into their home campaigns or even into an official adventure like Rime of the Frost Maiden, where if somebody is like, I want a bit more of a puzzle element, well, go through the puzzle section of Tasha's Cauldron and see if something there would fit. And there are enough puzzles with very different puzzling styles in Tasha's Cauldron,
Yeah.
that you do have a nice amount of options. Basically, there's some good selections on the rack to go back to shopping.
The Nordstrom rack.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, and I especially, because I've been that player and DM who has seen puzzles, and you're like, well, if you the solution is the fun part. Sometimes the lead up to that is not as fun for a player who can get frustrated, and myself is one of those where I just want to know the answer, And so what I really appreciate about this section is that it provides a way to give hints to your players that don't give it away, that don't feel like you're just giving them the solution, but you're giving the right pieces of information. I think Elisa did such a great job, as well as the rest of the team who revised all those sections, to tie that to skills too. That it's a very D&D thing to be like, oh, if someone is gets a 15 DC on their Arcana, they'll get this little piece of information, which doesn't give the puzzle away, but gives just enough to know that there is a puzzle there, and then also to hopefully give them the tools that they need to solve it.
Yeah. I love that element too. And also we even include in several of the puzzles, here's where you might just want to stop. If your group is just super frustrated.
If you can't take a hint.
Yeah.
Read the room, dungeon masters.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's really good.
Now I just need some advice on what to do if they just avoid the puzzle altogether.
Greg was saying he tried to do a puzzle in his game yesterday, and the players were like, nope.
Yeah. I introduced it. Everyone was like, great, thinking about it. And then they decided to spend the session exploring a completely different area. I'm like, oh, okay, well. And Shelley's suggestion was to just put the puzzle there. And I'm like, well, it doesn't always work.
Just make it follow them around until they solve it.
Which is a DM trick I have used with certain things before, where it's like, oh, you don't want to do this now? Just you wait.
Okay. You open the door and there's a puzzle. Knock, 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 adventurers.
You want to go behind door number 1? Well, door number 3 has exactly what was behind door number 1 as well.
Yeah.
It's not going away.
Yeah.
So, you and I, Jeremy, went into some of the lore behind Tasha on a special section, but I'd love to, talk a little bit about the demon connection, because I feel like there's a lot of items and stuff in here that could be a lot of fun for people who want to, kind of explore that part of the book.
So in the magic items section of the book, there is the Demonomicon of Igwelv. And as some of our listeners might not know, Igwelv and Tasha are the same person. And if you go through D&D history and see the number of times Tasha and Igwelv, those names have shown up, you suddenly realize, oh my gosh, she has been busy. And
in more ways than one.
Yes, and in her busyness, she created this artifact that is one of the most hated, if not the most hated artifact in the D&D multiverse by demons, because Tasha created this Demonomicon to control and oppose them, and in the process, even was able to stitch a little pocket of the abyss into the book itself. That's how crazy this artifact is in its might, and that is one of the artifacts here. You can also get Baba Yaga's mortar and pestle, which and Baba Yaga was Tasha's mom. So we included a number of items like that in the book tied to Tasha's past, and they could easily be items that you are, as adventurers, trying to acquire yourself, or that you're trying to get away from your foes, because a number of these items could be quite terrifying in the hands of your enemies. And you will also see some of that fiend summoning in the summoning spells, and also one of Tasha's new spells in the book, Tasha's otherworldly guise, is all about adopting characteristics of the outer planes. But we made sure in this spell to nod to the fact that Tasha isn't just familiar with traveling to the lower planes, but also the upper planes. And so this spell allows you to adopt characteristics that are associated with fiends or celestials. So you can be a little bit like a demon or a devil if you want, or you can be angelic using this. And there again, we're getting at the moral flexibility that Tasha has, that she does what she feels she needs to do, and you again even get a taste of that in one of these new spells.
That is cool. I mean, I feel like there's so much more in this book to go over. Like that's what's a bit bizarre for us is that it's a 196 pages. That's right.
192 pages.
192. Mm-hmm. But it feels like there's like 4 pages of content on each one of those pages. Like it's just chock full of stuff.
It is deep. There's a lot.
It felt like that making it.
Sure.
When the layout that Trish Yoakum and the rest of that team, putting it all together, man, it is tough to pack it full.
Yeah, it was sort of like sitting on a steamer trunk. It's like, oh my gosh, this will only fit, 2 weeks of clothes, but I have tried to put in 3 weeks into this thing. Mm-hmm. And now let's just, sit on it and hope I can get it to close.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the book also has the exploration of different supernatural regions, different magical phenomena. Also has rules on different environmental hazards. These are all here as tools for the DM to pick up and fairly easily inject the flavor of a particular type of fantasy realm pretty simply into their campaign. So for instance, if a DM has decided, all right, this group is going to wander into this realm that has been bedeviled by ghosts for generations, and you really want to quickly inject this feeling of being in a haunted realm, well, we have rules now on here's what can happen when you are in a whole area that has basically been taken over by the unquiet dead, with a table to roll on to find out, what kind of spooky thing pops out to scare you or complicate your adventure, or to maybe even introduce a new quest. So we do that for a variety of different kinds of supernatural regions. And even though they're called supernatural regions, a DM could easily take these rules and apply them to a dungeon, to a castle, to a house. We purposefully leave the notion of region very open-ended. You could decide as DM, I'm going to apply this table of environmental effects to this one room in this dungeon. So really, it's region can expand and contract the meaning of it based on the DM's needs for their campaign.
That's a really cool idea. It's a great way
inspiring.
It's a great way to make just people be like, all right, this is not your normal area, no matter what it is, as you said, like, that I'm going to use it. I'm going to totally use it.
And the beauty of these tables, and we created them this way on purpose, is even if you decide not to use the rules that we provide that say when these different supernatural effects might trigger, you can also, if you want, just roll on these tables at some point. Like, let's say you're running a game and they're in the middle of some mind flayer colony, and you think as a DM, I just want something really strange and otherworldly and kind of ooky to happen right now. I'm going to roll on that far realm table that's in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything to see what strange and probably slimy thing just occurred here in this dungeon or wherever the adventure is taking place.
Who doesn't love a table?
Oh my God.
All of them.
Shelley, I was about to say that exact same thing. Like that,
really?
It was the exact inflection and everything. Being like, who doesn't love rolling on tables? It's the best fun part of D&D as a dungeon master.
It really is. I love it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love. Oh, sorry, you were going to go on about the
I want to find out what you love.
sidekicks.
Oh,
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly what I was about to talk about.
Whoa!
We are on the same wavelength.
I think I've got some psionic powers.
You're an aberrant mind.
I am. I'm incepting both of you right now.
Oh my gosh, everyone heard it here first.
Jeremy, we're having field roast for dinner. Field roast. Yummy.
I actually really like field roast. And now I don't know if I actually like field roast or if I've been instructed to like field roast.
Greg, you will make sushi rice at 4:30.
I have to. I need to.
So weird. I don't know how I know that. Sidekicks.
Yeah, so I am so glad people are now going to get their hands on the full Sidekick rules. People of the Essentials Kit, of course, got to see an implementation of those rules where they got specific sidekicks that they could level up with their characters. But now we're giving DMs the ability to make all sorts of different sidekicks with information going from level 1 all the way up to level 20. The sidekick classes that we present can be used for actual sidekicks, but they can also actually be used for just traditional NPCs. And if a person really, really wanted to, they could just play one because we give you all the information you need to go from level 1 to level 20. You're not going to be as powerful as somebody who takes one of the classes from the player's handbook, but you're still going to be able to make a meaningful contribution to your adventuring group. And the sidekicks each have little wrinkles in their abilities that the player's handbook classes don't have. So I could see some people, in fact, I already know there are people because of feedback we got to the original Sidekick Unearthed Arcana who are actually eager to play these classes. There are people who are like, I want to play the expert. And then the 3 classes there's the warrior, the expert, and the spellcaster. And I'm especially looking forward to seeing the different critters people have join their adventuring group because these sidekicks, of course, don't have to be humanoid. We show in the art.
The art I love. I just love it.
Like there's that wolf that on the team, I think the wolf was everyone's favorite. But you could, befriend all sorts of different creatures. And be like, hey, come along. And then that creature is leveling up with your group using one of these classes.
So I think that it might be also a good way to introduce someone to D&D because they're easier to create and they're, like you said, they're like a little scaled back from it's probably good to not have that many choices when you're first learning. And you could just create a sidekick and be like, here, you're just going to join our party for the day, teach them a little bit about D&D, go off on your own.
In fact, Shelley, we love that idea so much. We've actually talked about what if in some future adventures we actually suggested starting your character off as a sidekick and then multi-class into one of the classes in the player's handbook, or just keep leveling up as a sidekick.
Yeah.
That's what I love about this system, is that it's so modular. You can use it, just as presented in the Essentials Kit, where they're just sidekicks that you use to fill out your party, or you can do them as NPCs. I mean, everybody loves the convenience of having just like the spy and the commoner and all those stat blocks. But, if you're just like, oh, I want to tweak it just a little bit, you can do that so easily with the sidekick rules. I think that's going to be a great tool that people are going to use many, many different ways in their storytelling.
And I agree. And this is yet another example, by the way, of the community helping shape the final version of the sidekicks.
Right.
Because the original version that we released was more complex than what people are going to see in Tasha's Cauldron. And the reason for that change is we heard overwhelmingly from the playtesters that they loved the sidekicks, but they wanted them to fulfill their identity even better. And the identity that the playtesters identified was being pretty straightforward to play and not having a whole lot to keep track of as they level up. Yeah. And we really took that apart and greatly simplified their leveling up process. People will see that the final version of the Spellcaster has far fewer spells than the playtest version did, because for that, the feedback we got is this NPC spellcaster or sidekick spellcaster feels too much like a player's handbook spellcaster. And so we took that feedback very seriously and scaled it way back. That character's still going to make a solid contribution to a group. They still are going to be able to choose damage spells or healing spells or other sorts of helpful magic and bring that to the table in whatever group they're a part of.
But they're not just like a priest light or a sorcerer light. It is their own way to level up, which I think is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet. Well, the final thing I want to point out, and we've kind of been talking about it throughout, but the artwork in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is just superb. Kate Irwin leading the art direction for this entire book has been just knocking it out of the park, as with the myriad of artists that we work with on this. Shelley mentioned the art orders, and it does start from you guys describing it, but how many times have you been impressed by seeing the actual artwork come to life from the paragraph that you wrote about it?
Oh, every time. For anyone watching who doesn't know our process, our team of writers, and so in this case with this book, that included me and the other designers on the book, we write these little paragraphs describing, here's what we'd love to see in this work of art, but it never matches what the artists then give us under the direction of Kate Irwin. There are details that the artist brings to the image that weren't in our original description. Our description might have been, she's pointing over there and summoning an angel, the end. And then you get the image and it's like, oh my gosh, it's so luminous and immersive and, so many lovely touches. And, Kate works with the artists to draw a lot of those beautiful grace notes out. And she also, a huge piece of the wonderful creativity that she brings to each of our books is also carefully selecting the artists who do these paintings, because she reads our descriptions and then matches them with the artists who she thinks will give us a particularly wonderful realization of what we were imagining. And so a big part of her work as art director is actually that relationship with each of the artists and knowing what they like and what they're good at and what they would be especially suitable to portray. So it is always a privilege to work with her and with the artists who work for her.
She's got such a great memory and relationship with all these artists that you can be like, oh yeah, no, they're very good at landscape, so I'll give this piece to them, which has describes the supernatural landscape in this way, or like they're very good at faces, but they're not as good with Dragonborn, so let me give this Dragonborn one to this artist who really brings the dragon expressions to life and all that stuff. It's really a wonder to hear her describe the different talents of the artists that she's worked with in a way that like reminds me of a baseball manager talking about the players on their team, or the different tools that a different actor can bring to a different script. It's all in that same collaborative atmosphere, and it really doesn't just come from on high. It comes from the creativity of the artists themselves.
Yeah, for sure. And their wonderful creativity is on display throughout this book. People have gotten some nice tastes, I think, of it in previews that we've done. But to me, there's really no experience quite like seeing all the art together in the book. Yeah. And then that art presented by Trish Yoakum, the lead graphic designer of the book, who contextualizes all of it with the different beautiful little flourishes you see on the page, the color scheme that ties it all together. And all of those elements working together, the text, the graphic design, and the art, is really a manifestation of our very holistic creation process. Because, as you two well know, it's definitely not like different teams sort of in silos passing things to each other. We really work as a single team, especially in the final month or so of work on the book, where we often joke about that we Voltron into this this single being to create the D&D books that people end up seeing on their shelf.
Yeah, whenever we ship a book like this, I always think of the excellent video that the Adobe Create magazine created with you, Kate Irwin, and Emmy Tanji in that situation, putting those the books together. And it is a Voltron of you guys all coming together around the galleys and putting them all together and describing how we need some more text to fill up this page so that this piece of art looks really great, and it is a melding of minds. It's really, really cool to see.
Which we are in the process of doing that right now for a book we have not even announced.
Dun dun dun.
I know it.
Well, and it's not unlike the three of us mind melding together about what we're going to talk about next.
Which is field roast.
Field roast and
so
sushi
hungry
rice.
right now. It's going to be delicious.
Well, thanks so much, Jeremy, for coming in and talking to us about all the amazing amounts of D&D material that is in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. By the time people are listening to this, it will be out in stores in North America as well as digitally. And those of you who are jumping in, I'd love to hear about how you're bringing some of the stuff to life in your games here. And Jeremy, what's the best way for people to perhaps tell you about some of the fun stuff that they've made up in their games?
Please tell me what fun you're having with content in Tasha's Cauldron at Jeremy E. Crawford on Twitter.
Excellent. Well, we'll let you get back to that book that we have to announce soon.
Yes. Voltron
Right.
out of here.
So
Excellent
fun
job.
talking to you too.
So much
Always,
fun.
always great to talk to you. And thank you. This is a wonderful book. We're all so excited about it. So thank you and your team for all of the work you put into it.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for all the work you've been doing to promote it.
That's easy. It's easy to promote. They're sidekicks. Come on.
You're not fooling me. I know it's hard work.
All right, I'm going to go cook up some field roast in my Cauldron of Everything.